You are listening to the Examine Life with Bram Levinson. This is the 40th episode of this podcast, which completely blows my mind when I consider that I started it, a handful of months ago, and I have really picked up the microphone and just started recording whenever I felt the need to do so, which in some cases was like, once a day in some little spurts of time, and then in other moments it was like once every little while, once a week, that kind of thing, once every 2 weeks. But it just sort of blows my mind that already 40 episodes. Absolutely crazy. The episode that I want to record right now, the subject matter that I want to record right now, really speaks to everything else that I have recorded about. And ultimately, it brings us back to one of life's great equalizers, and that is suffering. I want to talk about what we do with suffering. What do we do in the presence of suffering? Years ago on my blog, I wrote a blog post about key elements or key principles to remember in times of darkness. And I had written this simply because there seemed to be this overwhelming sense of dread and doom and gloom about what was happening politically around the world. So, I sort of directed my words towards that. But, the stuff that I wrote, a lot of it is transferable, not necessarily specifically used for times of darkness, but ultimately understanding that darkness is just another word for suffering. Darkness is the manifestation for many people of suffering. Moments of suffering are moments of darkness. But I want to talk about this because I just had a session with a client who is going through cancer treatment. And a lot of the subject matter that we went over was simply how to stay focused, especially in the moments where the chemo and, the effects of that on the brain and on the body simply leave you in such a hole of suffering that there is no higher awareness. There is no ability to redirect the mind. There is nothing except just this low, this moment that is just so horribly physically uncomfortable. And it was I found it to be a very interesting conversation that we had, because ultimately what this person is going through is just a more extreme version of whatever any of us would describe as suffering. For some of us, that's just having a bad day. For some of us, it's worrying about money. For some of us, it's carrying our past traumas with us and not wanting to carry them with us, not wanting them to be the cross that we need to bear for the rest of our lives, but yet that's what it feels like it is anyway. For some people, it's, looking in the mirror and hating what they see. For some people, it's just the struggle. It's whatever we struggle with on an individual level. Every single one of us has a struggle, a daily struggle, whether that's simply internal in terms of belief, in terms of the thoughts that come up related to whatever that struggle is, or whether it's an actual physical slog, whether we're carrying 3 jobs and just trying to make ends meet, whatever. But you know what? Everybody is fucking struggling. Everybody has something that they're working with and trying to make the best of and trying to rise above. And it speaks to that tension of opposites, that state that we all live in where, there's always a decision to be made, and we're always trying to do our best, and we're always trying to navigate our way through the duality of this and that, and try to stay focused and try to make the right decisions and try to make decisions we can be proud of and try to make everybody else fucking proud of us. And just Jesus, it's exhausting. It's just so exhausting. And I suppose that my experience with suffering as a child is what prepared me or put me in a position where I could talk about stuff like this later on in my life and know what I'm talking about and be able to relate to other people's suffering. Because again, it doesn't matter what the label is associated to one person's suffering versus another. Suffering is suffering is suffering. So whether you are suffering because there is grief, or whether you are suffering because there is insecurity, or whether one is suffering because there are financial issues, or whether one is suffering because one lost a job, whatever it is, suffering is suffering. And you meet it the same way. You need to be able to understand it to be, again, one of life's great equalizers. This is something that regardless of how much money you have or how much opportunity or privilege you have, tough shit, there will be suffering. And so this is common for all of us. It is something that we share. It is something that unites us. And we're not taught how to deal with suffering. Okay, we're taught how to go to school and learn what society and culture has told us is important enough to learn and to memorize and to potentially be able to apply. With that said, there's so much shit that I learned in school that I never, ever use. I haven't had to use it. It does make me question the whole educational system. But anyway, we're not taught. We're not taught how to deal with darkness. We're not taught to deal, or how to deal with insecurity. We're not taught how to navigate moments where, emotionally we don't feel equipped. We're not taught to deal with eating disorders. We're not taught to deal with financial instability. We're not taught to deal with fear. We're not taught to deal with any of that shit. We're taught how to multiply and divide and, fucking make money. That's what we're taught how to do. That's what our educational systems do, is they train us to go out into the workforce, make enough money so that we can contribute to the economic system and hopefully keep our heads above water the whole time. And that's about it. And to be honest, I don't put a lot of faith in the educational systems. They never really worked for me. I did what I had to do, but I did it on my terms. I skipped a lot of fucking school in high school. I wrote myself a lot of notes, signed by my mother, obviously. But I don't know. I tend to believe that the people who accomplish the most in this life are the ones who understand what the structure is and then break away from it, as I've spoken about in previous podcast episodes. But I believe that, maybe I'm an example. I don't know. I go out and I do what I want to do, how I want to do it, and it's not because I've taken any fucking program at a university. Sorry, I know I sound aggressive when I talk about this, but I really feel like we're so directed in ways that are antithetical to common sense and to actually bringing us to a place that we want to be, not the place that other people think we should be because they've gone there, and if they had to do it, then why the fuck would we not have to do it? But I just don't think that we're encouraged to pursue our own well-being and to really do it on our own terms. And I think if everybody did it on their own terms, the economy would be in a better situation. I think everybody would be more, satisfied, more generally happy, content, feeling like they're getting what they hope to get out of this experience of life. And if I was going to start at school, and trust me, I'm not going to start getting caught up in all that bullshit with the government and with curriculums and stuff like that. But I think I'm a teacher. I think I teach in my own way. And I think that the stuff that I want to teach is life and death stuff. It's life and death, hope, faith, suffering, fear, those things. Those things that are common to every single one of us, regardless of what you majored in university. I couldn't give a flying fuck. I really couldn't. Sorry. Let me digress here. I was talking about suffering. Let me get back to suffering. I've just pulled myself into this tangent, this hole of, railing against everything I believe is guiding us or leading us astray. And then people judge each other when they fuck up on that path that they didn't even want to be on in the first place. What the hell? Seriously. I think that we need to look at what our relationship is to suffering. I think we have to look at what we can do in moments of suffering, in moments that are anything less than calm and anything less than good challenging, right? The challenge that we thrive on. Anything that brings us away from a place of feeling hopeful and feeling connected and feeling, I guess, just stable even in instability. I think that the first thing that we always have to remember is that regardless of what is going on, if there is suffering, we have to understand that that is normal. We have to understand that there is no moment in time that isn't going to be rife with turmoil, with difficulty, with fear, or with obstacles. There is no moment in time equally in which peace and ease and faith and trust aren't accessible. even when their opposites seem unstoppable. I really believe that humanity needs to remember that everything coexists, right? So if there's one thing that I'm going to pass on to everybody, it's that remember that you can only focus on one thing at a time. And if you're focusing on the shit that is pulling you deeper into the bad place, focus on its opposite. Yoga Teaching 101, focus on the stuff that is good. Focus on the stuff that is beautiful. Focus on the shit that makes you laugh. Listen to music that makes you feel good. Watch shows all day, every day, for as long as you need to, that bring you into a place of feeling good and feeling like you have escaped for a little bit, so you can reset the balance of sensations that the body is at the mercy of. Pay attention to things that are going on in the world that restore your faith in hope and humanity and people. Don't read the newspaper. Surround yourself with people who make you feel great. Surround yourself with food that makes you feel great. And I'm not going to say eat food that has, vital energy to it, blah, blah, blah. Other people are talking about that. They're doing a better job than I am. Eat the shit that makes you feel good. Not and I mean good long term, not the shit that makes you feel good in the moment and then 3 hours later you're like, did I really eat 3 bags of Doritos? Like, not that thing. Do what you need to do so that you feel better. In the presence of suffering, there is an imbalance of sensation. So a lot of the sensations associated to fear and hopelessness are what start to manifest. You need to balance those out. So start to treat yourself, start to spoil yourself. Give you what only you can give you so that you can reset the balance and come back to a place where you can remember that everything coexists, that everything that is good is also in the presence of everything that is bad, and everything that is bad is also in the presence of everything that is good, and that ultimately good and bad are just constructs of the human brain based on how the shit makes us feel. Remember that how you choose to respond to life, to suffering, it's the most important choice that you're going to make. Any form of suffering, any form of discrimination, any form of depression or oppression is unacceptable. Okay, so to meet suffering, to meet discrimination, to meet racism or homophobia or misogyny or any act of unfairness or hate or intolerance with more negativity simply feeds the energy that you're objecting to initially. So if you want to end the negative cycle of whatever, of suffering or of hate or discrimination or whatever you're objecting to, you have to be conscious of how you may be inadvertently perpetuating that cycle under the guise of, indignation. Recognize what the cycle is. That requires us to practice yoga. And practicing yoga basically means step outside of your limited awareness and understand that there's a different way that you can perceive what is going on. Moments of suffering are not simply moments that are like punching you over and over and over repeatedly to see if you can just take it. Moments of suffering are asking us to discover what we know now because of the suffering that we didn't know before the suffering. Occasionally, what happens is when the suffering passes and we feel that sense of elation that, oh my God, okay, this moment did pass, that elation is heightened because the suffering was deepened. The depth of the suffering will inform the height of the revelation or whatever alleviates the suffering. So I think it's very important that we understand that we have a choice as to whether we let cycles continue on being what they are, the things that we're objecting to, or whether we stop them in their tracks. And that really has to do with being aware of what the mind is doing, what you are thinking of. Think of something else. Understand that you have a choice as how you respond. This is a huge tool. This was massive for me years ago when there were lots of things going on in my life. I used to believe that when something wrong was going on, it was simply the cross that I had to bear, and you just got through it. And hopefully you did it without too many gray hairs appearing or, scars, whether they be visible or not. And what I learned a couple of years ago is, I've got a choice as to how I respond to this. I don't need to just let it happen and, put on blinders and huddle in a corner. No, I'm going to fucking live. Even in the presence of this, I'm going to live and I'm going to have fun and I'm going to listen to the music that makes me feel better and eat the food that makes me feel better and hang out with the people that make me feel better because I can. Just because the narrative all of a sudden is this, just because something uninvited has entered into the equation doesn't mean that that shit is going to control me. It's not going to hold me hostage. Okay, fine. It's something that I didn't invite in. It is occurring. Fine. Doesn't mean that the rest of the shit needs to fall away. I think that we are meant to spend our time really cultivating the seeds that flourish into lasting contentment and happiness. We're meant to embody and emanate the vibration of joy, which means that in the presence of whatever pulls us away from joy, it's our responsibility to seek it out. And again, music, good friends, good food, good thoughts, good TV, whatever. But I think that we're meant to have fun with this time that we have in these lives of ours. Getting stuck in that which leaves us resentful or disappointed or ashamed or afraid or sad really propels us away from happiness and joy. And it is our responsibility to seek out light when darkness smothers, when it's overwhelming, to take action, to touch happiness, to touch beauty when sadness is overwhelming. Our natural state, I believe, is one of joy. And so we have to remember to do whatever it takes to experience the sensations of joy when they seem the furthest away. Now, I want to speak to the moments that are so heavy and so dark that, there is real concealment. All of the higher awareness, all of the higher teachings are completely absent. It's not even like we're aware that they're absent. They're just not. In the case of the person who I just spoke to, who's going through the cancer treatment, that moment after chemo where things are just so rough that there is no awareness of anything else, these are moments that you simply have to get through. And the way that I understood this moment from the client who I was working with reminded me of a year ago to the day. A year ago this week, I think it started shortly after New Year's last year of 2019, but I caught the flu for the first time in a long time. I had stomach flu, that kind of thing, but I caught a flu last year that really left me shocked because it completely incapacitated me. The moment that I remember so clearly is being fetal on the couch and being so shocked. I was observing how much sickness there was, how much illness there was, how hard it was for a full breath to take place, how depleted of energy I was. I was just observing it, and the thought kept coming up going, wow, I can't, this is something, this is serious. And it was in that moment that I understood how the flu kills people who either are immunocompromised or elderly or very young or just in situations where something like that would just take them right out. I understand it. It was shocking to me that there could be that much sickness in this body. And so in that moment, instead of fighting it or instead of pretending it didn't exist, I literally just lay there on the couch and I thought, breathe. Take this breath by breath. Take this moment by moment. You have no other choice. It's not like, you can pretend this isn't happening. So breathe. And listen, even the breathing was labored. It was shocking. In these moments where there's just such a struggle to... No, you know what? I retract that. In the moments where shit is happening, and this actually, you know what? This is a great metaphor. About, 10 or 15 years ago. No, it wasn't that long ago. Anyway, long time ago. I had gone up to Mount Royal, the mountain in Montreal. It was springtime. It was the first warmish day. I went with my partner. I was wearing jeans and a jean jacket, which in hindsight, I should have been crucified for, and it will never happen again. And there's no photographic evidence, so you can't prove it. But nonetheless, I thought that was a good idea. So anyway, we went up to the mountain. And it was really muddy. All the snow and the ice from the winter was melting, and it was sort of like trickling down, not trickling, like pouring down the mountain in parts. Anyway, we were coming down after having been on the mountain for about an hour. We were coming down the mountain, and instead of taking the stairs, I thought, oh, you know what? I'm going to take the side of the hill thinking that I practice yoga. I know how to be stable. I know how to stay vertical. Yeah. Cut to me sliding in like I don't know if you ever saw the movie Romancing the Stone in the 80s, but there's a lot of mud in that movie. I slid down the side of the mountain in a torrent of what I believed was snow, water, and mud. It very well could have been animal shit from the winter. It could have been junky shit. I don't fucking know. But all I know is that I slid down the side of that mountain in my jean ensemble. And when it was all over and done with, I found myself at the bottom of that part of the hill, covered in filth. I was really pissed off. I was like, we are going home. This fucking sucks. Like it was such a moment of concealment, really. There was no higher knowledge there. And I just remember that moment where I slid, where it started happening, where like the slide into the torrent started to happen. When it happened, this thought went through my mind going, oh shit, this is happening. It's happening. And there's no stopping it. In moments where it's happening and you can't stop it, do your best to just get through it with as much calm as possible. Okay, so there are going to be moments that are going to suck. There are going to be moments where all of the teachings that typically bring us some sense of relief and some sense of, higher awareness aren't helpful. There are going to be moments where we just rage, and there are going to be moments where we just suffer, and that's unfortunately part of the equation. However, we need to remember that they pass. That's one of the most important ways or principles to meet suffering. Remember that this too shall pass. Life as we know it is simply a series of moments. Some of them will be pleasant, others are going to be unpleasant, but they're moments, pure and simple. So we have to continually remind ourselves that this moment will pass. Doing so will allow us to hold on when events get rocky. It's also going to allow us to appreciate the good while the good presents itself, because that too shall pass. And so in the moments where things aren't great, better things are coming. In moments where things are great, you better recognize, appreciate, because nothing is ever one thing for very long. We also need to remember that there's a fraction of a second that exists between stimulus and response. Okay, between what instigates fear or sadness or anger and the emotional reaction that it elicits. So in that fraction of a second, we have to remember to breathe deeply. A deep breath not only helps release the existing tensions that the body's carrying, but it helps deflect new ones from landing. Breathe deeply to stay in action and avoid falling into emotional reaction. Take a deep breath. And just notice what that does. I know it's so basic and it can be so trite and so hallmark bullshit, but it works. It is a real thing. Depersonalize this narrative. I've spoken about this before at the beginning of the podcast, beginning episodes, I talked about this. Depersonalizing the narrative that is unfolding and affecting you is essential to seeing events as they are and not how you fear they may be. So very often when people come to me for coaching or mentoring, essentially what they're asking me to do, without knowing that they're asking me to do it, is they're asking me to reframe the narrative that they're coming to me with. The things that are weighing down on them, they are coming to me so that I can give them a different perspective on said events. And in doing so, they can garner a different understanding of what's been going on and assign a different meaning to it and walk away feeling like, okay, so that thing that I thought was one thing may not be that one thing. It may be something else, and maybe I don't need to take it so seriously, and maybe it's actually helpful. Maybe the curse is a blessing, that kind of thing. Depersonalizing the narrative is basically taking you out of the equation. Pretend you're reading about the situation and it's happening to somebody else. What would you tell that person? How would you guide them? How would you be able to fall into the reasoning brain, into the logical brain, into the methodical brain, and give them, I guess, advice that is helpful? Advice that they can actually believe and not just some, useless piece of positive affirmation. It really is about being that person for ourselves, or at least finding someone who can do that for us when we don't have the power to do it for ourselves. But depersonalizing the narrative, look at the facts. Imagine that you're reading an article, about someone else, occurring to someone else, these events occurring to someone else. Ask yourself what advice you would give to those people. Take yourself out of the equation, even momentarily. Doing it allows you to step out of the emotional stranglehold that fear instills in us and has on us, so that we can keep a level head and proceed with clarity. I think that we are really meant to spend our time working with joy, working with happiness, remembering that this is our default. And listen, the reason why things land as uncomfortably as they do is because they pull us away from that default. And the more we get pulled away from that default, the more all we know is we're not happy, or I'm afraid, or I'm sad, that kind of thing. We just want to come back. We want to come back to center. We want to come back to, that sense of, I guess, balance, of equanimity, of neutrality, where, yeah, there's good and there's bad, but there's not one that's sort of dominating the other. Everything just sort of coexists, and it's okay, I can deal. It's about recognizing what is dominant and balancing it out, because you can recognize that it's dominant. It's really sort of taking a very scientific, pragmatic approach to this, instead of just getting stuck in the emotion of, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit. And another piece of advice that I'm going to give you is stop reacting to shit that hasn't happened. How many of us are walking through this day, today, right now, as you're hearing these words? You've been walking through today afraid of what might happen. What's going to happen if I lose my job? What's going to happen if the weather's horrible? What's going to happen if the money doesn't come in? What's going to happen if I don't lose the weight? What's going to happen if they find out that that's who I really am? What's going to happen? What's going to happen? What's going to happen? We spend so much time in the abstract worrying about shit that is never going to happen. And even if it does happen, it's not going to unfold the way we are afraid it's going to unfold. We spend all of this abstract time reacting to something that hasn't occurred. So stop it. Stop reacting to things that aren't, and start paying attention to what is. Look around you right now. Name 5 things in the room that are around you right now. That brings you back to this. Gets you out of the abstract. Understand that when this is suffering, we breathe. We try to surround ourselves with the things that bring us back into balance, closer to the joy, closer to the good, closer to the comforting. Maybe food, maybe people, maybe TV, maybe clothes, ugly clothes. Not a full denim outfit, please. But in the moments that are that, we remember that they will pass. We do whatever we have to do to stay as present as possible, which doesn't mean, by the way, that we pretend they're not happening. Remember when I slid down the mountain in that torrent of shit or whatever it was? I was like, this is happening. There's an acceptance. Acceptance is the precursor for change. Acceptance is the precursor for what comes next. The closer we get to being able to accept that this is, the closer we can get to what follows. If we start to deny that this is, then we're going to stay stuck in whatever it was for way too long. That's when it controls us. And I'm sorry, but that's unacceptable. Understand that there are going to be moments of suffering. And hopefully I've given you some stuff to think about when there is suffering so that you can recognize it, be present to it, ride it out, or attach to something else that is going to reinstate a little bit of equilibrium, a little bit of balance. But understand that for every moment of suffering, there is a moment of joy. There is a moment of ease. For every moment of illness, there is a moment of health. For every moment of feeling alone, there is connection. All of these opposites coexist. We just happen to get stuck in one half of a pair of opposites way too often. So remind yourself that it all exists, that it is all available. And in the moments where the suffering simply is and there's no getting out of it, breathe. Remind yourself that it will pass until you come to the next moment of grace where you remind yourself, or you are reminded of all the good that there is. And that suffering, even if it is ongoing, is just a fraction of the totality. So stay connected to the totality. I hope there is stuff here that is good enough for you to think about. Little points of interest that can, I don't know, instigate thought, and stuff that you can actually apply. I'm not talking about this stuff just to, blurb into a microphone, put it out into the ether, and, call it a day. I'm doing this because I want it to be of service. I want it to be useful. I want it to be helpful. So really remember this. Keep sort of bouncing back to this episode of the podcast when things start to go a little bit pear-shaped. And, let me know. Let me know if any of it proves to be helpful. And I will see you later. This has been the Examine Life with Bram Levinson.